Welcome everyone. This is our second webinar in our DPU COVID Urban Future series. This time we are testing a different format, and we open a call for different people to let us know how everyone is coping, but also imagining from the perspective of urban planners, urban practitioners, urban designers, of how to not only cope with this, but imagine the cities and our disciplines after the pandemic is over. So I'm Catalina Ortiz. I'm the co-program leader of the Master in Building and Urban Design and Development, and along with my colleague Giovanna Astolfo, we will be hosting this session. We were interested in bringing together the diaspora of alumni and fellow practitioners to try to, through this webinar, create a sort of infrastructure of care and affection, and to touch base on what everyone is doing and thinking and feeling. So in a way, this space is not only analytical, but also cathartic, as much as we are facing a lot of uncertainties, and it's good to think collectively about what would be the fate of our discipline, but also of us as practitioners. So as you know, urban design has been complicit in the production of the spatial distribution of privilege, and therefore we must rethink what then needs to be the role of the discipline in thinking and pursuing a more just city, and how to engage then critically with what is happening. And for that, we've been, in a way, thinking along those lines of recalibrating the discipline for very long. And now is again a new testing moment for pushing even harder, for reimagining and using this moment of inflection in humanity's history to rethink how should we create, produce not only better humanity, but also better ways in connecting and shaping the spaces we inhabit. We would like to also be rethinking and being very careful in defining what should be the new spatial practices, but also the discursive practices that we are using in this time, and what would be kind of the vocabulary we need to be using and bringing us together. As much as we hear, for instance, this idea of social distancing, instead we want to think about the physical distancing, but with social proximity. So by opening up these spaces, we attempt to bring some social proximity to think together along these lines. So one of the key questions that would guide today's webinar is about how, as designers and practitioners, how are we coping with the urban impacts of COVID, but also how are we imagining the aftermath? And for us, three key, let's say, categories have been very important for helping us making sense of what we are doing and what should will be doing, in terms of putting at the center the notion of care, the notion of solidarity, but also the notion of collective imagination. And that's why we would like to create together, in a way, a manifesto of how the discipline and practitioners should be thinking the city anew and our practices and the ethos of our own practice to put on the screen. And for that, we will be sharing in the panel there in your chat a link for you to drop some ideas while we are discussing along this hour. But before I start introducing our panelists that kindly agreed to share their thinking with us, I would like to read a very short quote just to, in a way, start and giving some flavor of the things that perhaps we should be aligning ourselves with. And it comes from Rob Hopkins, who's a thinker and practitioner about just transitions, and I think comes very handy in what we are experiencing now. So we need to become better storytellers in such a way that we can, through a variety of media, give people a visceral sense of what a positive future could sound, taste, feel, and look like. We need to create stories where the kind of future we want to see becomes a commonplace every day. We need to tell stories with an underlying sense that the mere telling of them can create a degree of inevitability about their becoming a reality, and a sense that speaking them out loud is a great benefit to our mind, a powerful antidote to despondency and trauma. And with that, I think inspire you to be thinking and writing your ideas in this idea of creating a collective manifesto. So without further ado then, I will be presenting the speakers. Each one of them will have 5 minutes. You can start plugging your questions in the Q&A chat. We will be collecting them, and in the final 15 minutes, we will be answering those and reading the comments that you leave us there. So first, I want to introduce Sarah Bissett-Scott. She is based, or she works in Anglia Ruskin University, and she will be sharing with us her first thoughts about COVID and the challenges for spatial justice. Sarah?
Right. Okay. Oh, it's telling me I can't share at the moment, sorry. Is that working yet? Yes. I'll have to call on Anoud, I think. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no worries. So Anoud, could you mind sharing the presentation? Oh, oops. I think we have an issue. So maybe if you don't mind, yeah, here we can see the presentation now.
Ah, right, good, thank you. Were you okay? Right.
Yes, go ahead.
Let's imagine, as a philosopher would, a thought experiment that challenges our liberal democratic future and why we must be vigilant for our spatial urban futures. What might our urban future look like? High-rise or sparse? What might be the ruling governance? Self-governed, individualistic, nationalistic, autocratic, and how would a Rawlsian vision of justice as fairness be achieved? Let us begin with the assumption that the underpinnings of philosophy for our social life, surroundings, and governing structure is how our decisions are taken. Will we desire to remain a liberal democracy shaped by enlightenment, articulated in contemporary philosophical and political thinkers, and tempered by the rationality of Stoics? Well, when I researched and delivered a thesis in 2018 on measuring regeneration outcomes for North Kensington, the idea that liberal democracy might not be anything but a given, that liberalism and democracy and spatial generosity would be each achievable and wanted objectives. But what's changed in less than 3 years? Grenfell Tower, exposure of contradictory management decision-taking, liberal, neoliberal revival in previously liberal-minded states, and of course, a global public health crisis that cuts across expectations of a socially liberal nature. Whose life, whose job, whose community, whose space, whose privacy, whose control is paramount? Those discussions are up in the air and ripe for review right at this time. So where is a baseline for starting this thought experiment? Some would say the people, some would say politics, and others would say the place. These circles of influence are vital lenses to a way of understanding the route through to a new style future in cities, our countryside, in the global breadbasket that will feed us as we transmute from an interlayered, culturally diverse hub to a networking exchange of individuals' production. So to review and revise and reorganize our philosophical perspective on each of these access points to our urban future, we require a continuum of local to regional scales of accountability. So look to Massey, Sodra, Harvey, and Dreisek and others and look to the urban responses of a public health crisis? Will stoicism temper our responses, rational science-based innovations with an understanding that this is how things are, just how life is? Will utilitarianism, the best outcomes for the greatest number over the greatest number of years, influence how we seek to design, manage and maintain our urban surroundings, remembering that this is a global situation and our food miles will come to matter? Will COVID bite into the production and distribution of, for example, our beans, coffee and green from Kenya, or our grapefruits from Florida or Israel, or flowers distributed through Amsterdam? Will we retain the assurance of homegrown hard spring wheat of milling flour as it is tested by changing employment, production and distribution of patterns? Well, imagine what are future cities? How can cities best respond to the needs of citizens and their countries? The complex multiplicity of history and heritage, an integral component of looking into the decisions of today and the near future, is by looking back. Our cities are the product of their own history, and our everyday lives are still shaped up by decisions taken hundreds of years ago. Yftachel, in Urban Justice and Recognition, saw the 2006 quote, "Just observe the law, everyone will benefit," unwittingly exposing unresolved land and planning disputes because of the unrecognized nature of social justice and group rights that might indeed work against spatial justice. We're at just such a turning point now, and right here, with the differences of land ownership, ruralness, regional differences, and urban living. So, post-COVID urban futures, design is to take account of spatial outcomes of public health protections, like distancing physically, managed socially with real-time thinking that can deliver the reality of acting virtually while keeping our social proximity, and politically supporting living collectively in an urban reality that maintains a rural or regional spatial connection, and with international cooperations supported by caring through technological connectivity. So, vision, spatial justice, courage, reason. Take a Stoic approach, as did Marcus Aurelius, faced with plague in the 2nd century BC, and adapt and apply in this 21st century. This vision, this spatial justice, take courage and have reason.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Perfect timing. Now we are going to hear from Belén Desmaison from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. She is speaking from Lima. It's very early, so good morning.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Catalina, Giovanna, and Anud. Let's see. So throughout history, the transition of urban planning and design practices responded to sanitation and public health concerns, and as shown by these plans for Paris by Haussmann and Le Corbusier, which promoted ventilation, access to clean air, and to green spaces. However, these projects have all the widely discussed limitations that top-down planning offers, and which we seek not to repeat. We are now entering a time in which a transformation in how we plan and design our cities will take place. And how do we envision this transformation? It will occur simultaneously and at multiple scales. In architecture, in the urgent revision of housing units, and at the urban scale, in how transforming our built environment so we can foster community and societal care and promote and facilitate opportunities for solidarity, reimagining the relationship between citizens and the states at all scales, in the district, metropolitan, regional, and the national. What role then does spatial design have in configuring and or promoting these new relationships? What does the pandemic tell us about our societies, particularly in the global South? In Peru, as the government imposed a total lockdown for 3 days during Easter, people rushed to buy food in overcrowded markets. Last week, the country saw a sharp increase in the number of positive cases, in which around 70% of new cases were people that went to buy food. Why didn't people prepare by buying and storing food before? Not everyone owns a refrigerator, as shown in this map in Metropolitan Lima shows. Space to store food in small houses is not an option, and not everyone can afford to binge eat their weekly stock in 4 days. For these and other reasons, Peruvian households, as many from the global South, go daily to a market. Overcrowding was a consequence of planning from a top-down perspective with good intentions, but being unaware of on-ground reality and needs. The government and citizens must work together to find pertinent solutions. Beyond the need to reconfigure shopping patterns and attending household necessities, there is also a need to reconfigure places where we gather, whether those are markets or colleges or factories. For the time being, we seem to be solving this through tactical urbanism measurements, like drawing lines or circles on the streets to keep us apart. However, that can dehumanize us to an extreme. What to do when the city itself is where we sleep and where we eat? What to do with the millions of homeless people worldwide? This pandemic shows us that the well-being of all citizens, if not all humankind, depends on the health of the most vulnerable. This is a conversion of a bullfighting arena into a homeless shelter in Lima during the lockdown. This is the first time we have seen such a response from the metropolitan government. How to transform this temporary measurement into a permanent one? The transformation awaiting urban planning and design must be that of care and solidarity in times where citizens, nations, and entire continents seek to reconstruct their lives. We are not going back to normal, and that is okay, as perhaps normality was a problem to begin with. In these times of retreat and physical isolation, we must remember that it is living in community that make us stronger, and we must, therefore, come with ways in which we can collectively rise from these circumstances. I think, for instance, of countless of women from all social backgrounds that have been hit particularly hard since their daily work now includes homeschooling and taking care of others. Can urban design help? Can we conceive, for example, community kitchens, child and elderly care, which is run by communities with the help of the local governments? How to do this while maintaining social distancing? As lockdown measurements ease, strengthening the self-sufficiency of small-scale neighborhoods units will be vital as metropolitan, national, regional, and global systems of exchange and travel will take longer to be fully restored. In his book, Palaces for the People, Klinenberg mentions how social infrastructure plays a vital role during risk situations. When residents in a neighborhood know each other, they help each other in times of crisis. Places like library, community centers, kitchens, and public spaces are where people meet each other to later support each other. It is time to incorporate sanitation issues in spatial design practices without forgetting their vital role of strengthening social ties, even if that implies physical distancing. Let's continue advocating participatory planning and design by reframing it through the lenses of solidarity while facing the challenges of climate change. Urbanism in the 21st century will be redefined as urbanism of care for our fellow humans and for the planet. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Belen. Perfect timing. Now we are going to move to Ramiro and Gabriela from the initiative Cidade Ativa.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly well.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Ramiro Levi, and together with Gabriela Callejas, we co-founded Cidade Ativa in Brazil in 2014. Cidade Ativa, or Active City, is this social organization that urges to create more inclusive, resilient, and healthy cities. Our work is inspired by the active design movement, which acknowledges the influence of good environment and behaviors, health, and well-being. So for us, this discussion is much more urgent than ever. So the coronavirus outbreak is here to force us to really carry out on our manifestos and leave behind these old urban design paradigms. So what actions we should be carrying out now to build this future together. Like was mentioned, it is important to understand how infectious diseases, we have to change. It is important to understand how infectious diseases shape the urban environment. So going back a few centuries, sanitation-led responses to cholera outbreaks resulted on sewer systems, water systems, and also influenced like city expansions. Responses to tuberculosis came in form of minimum ventilation, light, and building setbacks. Codes, plans, and infrastructure were the urban responses and preventive actions to these infectious diseases, but also justify the displacement of those already living in the worst conditions. In the 20th and 21st century, many of the proposed solutions to progress, they led to other unsustainable ways of living: urban sprawl, car dependency, and air pollution. The results, there's like 80% of deaths worldwide caused by these non-communicable diseases, so like heart diseases and diabetes or injuries. Even higher proportions of those non-communicable diseases in the global north. So shouldn't we also respond to this epidemic? Why we didn't? Air pollution is killing alone 7 million people globally, and just in the UK, 40,000. Road collisions cause over 1.3 million deaths per year, and in Brazil alone, over 40,000. The last decades, governments and civil society have been working to promote a much needed new urban reform. In Brazil, as a non-profit organization, we've mapped, together with colleagues, over 200 organizations standing for pedestrian mobility rights, for instance. And together we've been working to propose shifts in our cities and society. But when we face this immediate impacts and also understand the responses of COVID, as always, bigger impacts are on the most vulnerable populations. Inequalities become even more evident when you don't have a place to live or self-isolate, or you face food insecurity or lack of access to water. Impacts on health and well-being are even more concerning in terms of physical activity, higher levels of stress, loneliness, depression. How are we learning from this, and how are we responding to this crisis? Will the fear of these gatherings lead to people use more cars, avoid public transport, have restricted codes of how to use public spaces? Many cities are exploring these temporary street transformations to cope with social distancing, actually physical distancing in public spaces, cycle lanes, new play streets, widening footpaths. But is this enough response? Dramatic drops in air pollution and carbon emissions show that both actions could be used for tackling climate emergency. In many places, new networks of care and empathy are emerging. So by local support small businesses, schemes of collective help for vulnerable people in isolation. However, this crisis shows that we can't take things for granted. So the world we knew can still be out there once lockdowns are over, if we don't start actually changing things right now. It's too soon to predict the many emerging urban models that could fit in all these different contexts. The response to this crisis should establish what is no longer acceptable in our cities and society, like families without a home, neighborhood without a park, street that doesn't prioritize active modes of transport. We believe now that there's a great window of opportunity to implement the much needed radical changes from these old city paradigms. Our efforts to prevent and mitigate future outbreaks may allow us to rethink the built environment, invest in new policies and infrastructure that can tackle multiple pressing agendas. We must rethink the way we address emergencies, use this time to test ideas, propose interim transformations for long-term change, and propose interim transformations for long-term change. Can the temporary extension of footpaths and cycle paths become permanent? Can the solutions for homeless and elderly inform new housing programs? How can we explore alternatives for expanding access to water, sewage, and waste management systems? More than what we should be doing, how we should be responding to this crisis. We must collectively debate and reshift priorities. Our questions can be similar, but the responses should be local. How do we engage communities in decisions? How do we prioritize the collective over selfish individuality? How can we share solutions, experience that can be adapted to different contexts? For London and for Sao Paulo, they will likely be different. Debating this is a starting point, but we must turn ideas into action. So how are you actually shaping the future of our cities? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very important points raised by Ramiro. Now we are going to move to Martin Rivera Alzate. He's city councilor of the city of Bogota and also has been practicing ideas about tactical urbanism. So Martin.
Thank you very much, Catalina. Hello to everyone. I hope you're doing great at your places. You can see my screen now, right?
Yes, perfect.
So thank you very much for this opportunity and this space. This is a picture of La Candelaria, downtown Bogota. Usually it's packed of people. This is in the heart of the city and is where all the universities or most of the universities are located. Nowadays, it's completely empty, as are your own home places. Bogota is the capital of Colombia. It's located in the center of the country. We are around 8.2 million people, and with the metropolitan area, 11 million people. There's one mayor. For first time in history, we elected a woman mayor, Claudia Lopez. She has been in office only since the 1st of January this year, and she has been facing all these changes. We are divided in 20 localidades, the same as Buros. Our unmet basic needs is around 3.3%, is the lowest in Colombia. Half of our population are located in lower classes. We are divided by estratos. 1, 2, and 3 are the lowest ones. And the middle class is around 36%. So what's going on in Bogota? There has been a self-care background. Bogota was the first city in Colombia to call a quarantine on the 20th of March. It was a simulacrum. Then the president called a national quarantine on March 24th. We chose, as in Peru, pico y género. So on even days, women can go out, and on odd days, men can go out. Transgender people will depend on their gender identity, and we have had some issues on police brutality with transgender people. Our domestic violence attention line has gone up, has blown, and our emergency line has increased on over 400%. So far, 281,000 families have been benefited out of 1,008,000 aids. And last Sunday, we had a historic donation day where more than $13 million were collected to help 150 families in need. So one of our biggest issues, apart from the health issue, is that we have to care for those who are in need because of economical issues. So this is the map of Bogota. In purple, you'll find the marketplaces. In yellow, the Transmilenio, which is our main transportation system, the portales, the main stations. And in blue, you find a buffer of 300 meters distance from all public schools in Bogota, over 390. We proposed to the administration, to the city mayor and her team, to use this infrastructure, to use the public infrastructure to build up a logistics to give away all these mercados, all these food aids that the administration is giving to those in need. We think that such a big city as Bogota has to have a very strong logistics agency to give all this help. And if you see on this map, on the southern, like the bottom left part, which says Bosa, Ciudad Bolívar, and Tunjuelo, this is the poorest area of Bogota, and is the area where most cases of COVID-19 are being held right now. The red flags on these windows, they're kind of tactical urbanism. These are families calling for help. This has been a way of those in need calling to the administration that they're telling everyone that they need some food on their tables, that they need some groceries. The red flags in windows have been a symbol of not only poverty, but solidarity here in Colombia. Our mayor has been she has been leading a key role in the crisis, not only in the city, but in the rest of the country. So what kind of city do we want to become in the aftermath? Carmen Saldias, who is an economist here in Bogota, she used to run the Secretary of Hacienda. She said, to which normality do we want to return? If that normality was what brought us up here. We need to change of paradigm here in Colombia. We need to change our model of social, political, and economical challenges. We have to stop depending on natural resources and start thinking on our human capital that in Bogota and Colombia, we can have so much to give to the world. Thank you very much, Catalina.
Thank you so much. And Bogota is leading the way for a lot of local governments. So thanks a lot for sharing what you are doing. And congratulations to Mayor Claudia Lopez that we listen carefully every day. Now we are going to move to the other side of the world. And Shoko Sakuma is joining us all the way from Yangon in Myanmar. She works for Women for the World and is also our alumni. So very happy to have you and share your comments.
Hello everyone, can you see?
Yes.
Today I will briefly share the situation in Yangon and then some reflections how we can cope with the situation aftermath. This photo is from my balcony on Burmese New Year's Day. Usually people dance in the crowd and then get together, but this year people just get together in a small rooftop. Okay. So the situation in Myanmar. So although this country is bordering with China, Thailand, India, the response has been very slow. Until the late March, the government kept saying there was no case. Even from recent data, the number of cases and the tests is still much lower. So many people thought that there must have been more infected cases, partly because of the country's low healthcare system and the general lack of trust in the institutions. The pool of returning migrants was also a big concern, like a photo of over 30,000 migrants from Thailand. From April, some instructions were issued, like soft lockdown and nighttime curfew. Now it is difficult to tell what the government is trying to do. A strict lockdown was ordered in 7 townships in Yangon on the map on the left, but the size and the population of each townships are very different. Also, some of these townships have many urban poor populations. The risk of the loss of a food job is more than actual virus infection. Meanwhile, the government also released 25,000 of prisoners without appropriate coordination, resulting in creating the massive crowd. Obvious impact from COVID is loss of job, income, difficulty to get food, similar to other countries. Also, approximately 2.4% of the population are homeless in Yangon, but no measures have been taken so far. Meanwhile, in the conflict area, indiscriminate attacks by the military have been escalated. So how are we coping this? There are good examples like installing hand washing stations, awareness raising training, food donations, cash support have started from many sectors. And also some tricycle drivers started food delivery services to get some additional income. The top right photo is a market in a small town by making the physical distance. And then the bottom right one is the community's quarantine before the government's order in the village. So far, even before the crisis, donations or this self-care system is quite popular in Myanmar. And then also people get used to not relying on the government or institution. So this self-care system are small initiatives there, although there is a risk of discrimination on the other hand. Our organization and the community are doing okay so far. The community bought sanitizer, soap, food in bulk and share. They had stopped saving activities because the original process requires gathering. Microfinance agreed on 4 months moratorium for those who are taking loans for housing. Before, we have been supporting community-based actions like housing saving survey, but it became difficult since there were these things were through face-to-face communications and massive gathering. At the moment, we are trying to find how we can effectively support the community and others to work together. So some reflections. First thing is about distribution. My friend in Japan was saying that she realized how much she spent less during the lockdown. And this might apply to many places who earn a certain amount of money, no need to earn money as they used to do. And so this is an opportunity to rethink more equitable distribution by reducing salary, increasing tax from the rich or other things. And then third point is difficulty in the reality in vulnerable area under these restrictions. And so that is, for example, we don't even know if the similar COVID-related symptom had been in such areas, although we know about the larger risk once spread. So now it is even more important to work with people, work together with and the founder of PRIA said, we have to trust people in this moment of crisis. But it is not only for the crisis. The crisis was an opportunity to make us realize the importance and value of the aspect. And then lastly, stay-home instruction leverages the importance of the housing as basic needs. And this can be an opportunity to share the vacant land, house, property, and reach to the people who are really in need, rather than making just a profit. That's all.
Thanks a lot, Shoko. Thank you for keeping us updated on what is happening in Southeast Asia and the struggles of community groups under these circumstances. So now we are going to move to Panagiotis Takis. He works with civil society organizations designing programs on social inclusion. Now he's based in Berlin at the moment, and he will be sharing his reflections on the humanitarian side. Panagiotis?
Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Give me a second to share my screen.
Yes. Perfect.
So the following are a series of small reflections derived from my work and the work of my colleagues in the past weeks, from a civil society perspective, as well as smaller self-organized groups. As we see by now, that the pandemic is disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable, among which are refugees, undocumented people, people experiencing homelessness, precarious workers, migrant workers. And this is a list that can keep going depending on different contexts and different realities. In most countries, restrictions on movement and the narrative of state-mandated solidarity has emerged. Nonetheless, this is a narrative which is based mostly on individual responsibility, instead of a drive to increase public investment on social infrastructure and the public health system. This kind of response reinforces inequalities and neglects the rights and protection of the most vulnerable and marginalized. A field where this is more evident than others is housing and housing exclusion. As a person that experiences homelessness or is living in overcrowded accommodation cannot self-isolate, what we're essentially told to do. Moving at the case of Greece, which is currently home to about, let's say, shy of 100,000 asylum seekers and refugees, we saw the government responding to the first recorded cases of COVID-19 cases in camps by containing the camps in their totality, essentially limiting the mobility of people staying in the camp from the rest of the city. Same policy was observed towards other groups, such as Roma population. It's interesting that this policy was enforced in a country with a significant tourist infrastructure. There's currently more than 800,000 beds in 10,000 and more hotels nationwide, all of which are currently empty and will most likely remain empty this summer. At the same time, as mentioned, about 80,000 refugees and asylum seekers are hosted in overcrowded camps, such as the one in Malakasa, close to Athens, that we see the photo on the top, which is one of the first two camps where the policy of containment due to cases was enforced. As you can imagine, there is a heightened alarm by organizations working in Greece regarding what will happen to people staying in the camps in the eastern Aegean islands, such as Moria, the camps in Samos, and so on, where the overcrowding is up to the rate of 1,000% based on the capacity of these camps were designed. little bit of a different observation, which essentially came after a call for action by local cooperatives in Greece, is the fact that we might see long-term effects of the pandemic on local supply chains. In countries where there are still a lot of small-scale producers and which rely on selling the products to consumers directly, the restrictions on movement threaten the livelihood and long-term survival. In this sense, it is very likely that we will see a proliferation of the fittest, and by that we mean large companies with the cash reserves, lobbying power and resources and ability to adapt to the new reality. We could simplify this as a binary of Amazon versus the local shop, or Lidl versus the farmer's market. In places where dependence on multinational retail companies is not already the case, such as countries in Southern Europe and the Balkans, such a shift could change the relation of urban dwellers to rural communities and the way we access food and other necessary products. Another small observation has to do with the gradual easing of restrictions whereas we're at the point where we can make speculations about how we're going to slowly exit the state of exception we're currently in. It is likely that we'll see different speeds of relaxation of measures in different countries, based on the state and the form of critical urban infrastructure, such as public health infrastructure, as well as urban density of cities. There are also fears that some forms of measures or parallel effects of these measures will remain untouched in the long term. There's been examples of governments that use the state of exception in order to pass measures and legal amendments not directly connected with the pandemic, but serve other interests, either political or private. And moving on to notions of solidarity and imagination. Now that we're all sat at our desks, there's a little bit of a different territory that we're inhabiting, and which is leading to potentially different kinds of organizing. As people that as we're sitting at our desk, it's important to assume an active watchdog role by observing the emergency response measures and policies and their effects on our rights. It's interesting how the effects of the pandemic and the measures of restrictions have created a somewhat new ground for common struggle in terms of pushing for more public investment in social and health infrastructure, the management of rents during the time of crisis, workers' rights, migrant rights, and so on. It's interesting to see local solidarity initiatives popping up at neighborhood level. Again, due to the shift to online work, we see regional and international organizing initiatives. For example, Trans-Balkan Solidarity acts as a watchdog group for human rights abuses against refugees in the wider region of the Balkans. Another interesting aspect is attempts at international organizing amongst tenants unions globally, something we haven't seen before at that scale, with participation of groups from New Zealand, Australia, the US, Europe, and South Africa. As an open-ended conclusion, I'd like to highlight the need for us to be even more vigilant than before with regards to how the state of exception is affecting our rights, while at the same time trying to build on initiatives and actions that are offering radical solutions to issues that have been made bolder by the pandemic, but nonetheless have existed. And of course, how these translate to urban space. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your reflections and bringing such an important array of topics of discussion. Now we're going to move quickly to Nada El-Feitouri. She is based on Libya, and she's one of our alumni. So Nada, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm gonna share my screen. All right. So thank you, first of all, to the DPU for the opportunity to speak today. I think, like many people, I have been reading a lot of op-eds and a lot of think pieces on how our cities are changing, what does this mean for the future, and what role will urban design have in determining the future city. And what I wanted to do is kind of offer a different perspective, one that comes from the region, the Middle East and North Africa, of what does it look like when a crisis hits cities that are already affected by crisis, and what kind of aftermath can we envision when we're talking about multiple layers of crises. The case I'm going to look at is Libya, just because it's the one that my research focuses on, and it's the one that I'm most familiar with. And Libya has been in a state of instability and on and off warfare in different cities in different parts of the country for the past 10 years. I think the crisis has come to us, this particular crisis, the pandemic, at a time when the meaning home is already very tenuous. So we have hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced from their houses because of the fighting. You have people and cities that have been exiled, people who've had to leave the country as well. And so I don't think home is necessarily seen as a safe place right now in Libya. And I want to share artwork by a Tripoli-based artist. Her name is Rawiya bin Hussein, and she kindly allowed me to use her artwork. So it's in the form of like a meme. I'll translate very quickly because they're in Arabic. So the one on the left says, stay at home. The one on the right says, home activities that you can do while you're in quarantine. And the one on the left here says, don't forget to have time for yoga and for sports. And the one on the right says, here are some recipes that you can prepare in your kitchen, while you're at home. And these are pictures, obviously, of advice that is superimposed on pictures of a house that was recently destroyed in Tripoli. And the point of the artwork is that, sometimes it feels almost absurd when you're reading this kind of advice, this general, how do you cope with a crisis when you're already in a crisis? And how do you stay home? How do you, protect your relatives if you have to go to their house for protection because your area is unsafe, creating overcrowding, putting them at risk. And I think people in Tripoli right now feel that no matter what they do, they're in harm's way. And it's a very frustrating situation right now when you're caught between a global pandemic and between a war. And I think what I find really notable about the conflict in Libya now is the fact that the pandemic is being weaponized as part of the conflict. And so rumors and news about which cities are prepared, which cities are not accurately reporting, which cities are hiding how many cases they really have. This is all, becoming part of the electronic warfare. It's becoming, a big problem. A doctor went on TV recently saying that actually the city of Benghazi is not prepared. We don't have enough resources. Our hospitals are understaffed. And he was arrested the next day by the military authority governing the city. So it's also an issue of how do you deal with a pandemic with rising authoritarianism? Maybe not an active conflict, but more of a silent one that's happening between civil society and between authorities. But because I don't want this to be too depressing, I have noticed that the pandemic has given us an opportunity to kind of redefine vulnerabilities. So because Libya has been in a state of instability for the past 10 years, we already had the emergency response infrastructure in place when the pandemic was declared. So I think the WHO declared it a pandemic on the 12th, and by the 17th of March, most of the country was in lockdown. And it was largely thanks to the efforts of crisis committees that are formed on the local level, on the urban level, which are partnerships between the local authorities, between civil society organizations, between businessmen, who are able to mobilize and respond to the crisis. And I think this has changed the way where we see the role of the state in these kind of pandemics, as opposed to the role of the city, the urban areas. And just to wrap up, I think when we talk about the aftermath of COVID-19, we also have to think about how the pandemic has exacerbated and compounded existing vulnerabilities and existing crises. So what effect is it having on the housing crisis, on, again, the rise of authoritarianism, on failing infrastructure? I am going to put a link in the comments to a great blog post, which looks at this at the scale of the region at large. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nada. Very important aspects to consider in this multifaceted, complex world that we live in. Now, I'm going to invite quickly to Armando Caroca and Amani Shaban. They are going to present one of the initiatives that emerged out of this moment, and they will be very quick in sharing that.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting us. I am, Armando Caroca, Chilean architect. I came here with Amani Shaban, who is based in Jordan. We want to present our platform that we have created. It's called ThingFast, a collective urban response to COVID-19. This started as an initial conversation with Amani regarding how overwhelming can be all the news and flood of news regarding the crisis, and what can we do as practitioners to help doing something. So basically, we have created this online platform in which we tackle city aspects regarding the crisis, and how specialists and practitioners can also participate and cooperate along with public health, as we think public health is now a relevant part of planning from now on. Basically, our idea in this online platform is to discuss all the urban issues that we've been talking in this meeting, for example, regarding the outbreak, but also developing, and this is very fundamental for us, developing a set of propositions and practical recommendation and actions that could be transferred from one city or to one context to another, and would help to adapt to the pandemic in the short term. And by doing that, we want to share knowledge and resources and experiences from these practitioners coming from different parts of the world. Basically, we have defined two kinds of activities. One are the global talks, which are basically online conversations that we will do live broadcast with young practitioners from different parts of the globe, so they can talk about what they are doing, how they are coping. Shoko is also invited there, our guest today. And then we have another level, which is the specialist talk, which expert in different topics from urban styles and global health, etc., can discuss specific issues, which would be more like an interview. Basically, what we want to do is to define a manifesto of COVID-19 resilient cities, in which we can also cooperate with you and do something together. Maybe we can think about it. Post and develop all these live interviews and discussions online through our Facebook page. But we also wanted to make it very graphic and very easily transferable to wider audiences. So we want to produce graphic pieces like infographics, maps, or even small blog posts. And by doing this, we will start creating, and we already started creating, a network of collaborators for short, but also long-term issues. Basically, this is how it works so far. So we have this Facebook page. We will share it with you and also on the chat, so you can participate, share posts, and also join the conversations. And we also wanted to use this opportunity to invite you all to our first global talk next Saturday, this Saturday, 25th, 2 p.m. UTC time. We will talk with 3 practitioners from around the world about, specifically this time, about the lockdown, the restriction rules that apply on the population, and how communities cope with it and make the most of it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armando and Amani. It's always nice to hear what our alumni are doing. So now, just to conclude in terms of presenting another initiative, I'm going to give the floor to Gina Millán. She is also DPU alumni and researcher on smart cities, and she's going to share one of the initiatives that she's also involved in.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, but we see your slides all there.
Okay, yes, sorry. I'm just gonna switch. I'm super conscious of time, so I'm going to be very, very quick and brief showing this. So last year, Catalina, one of our co-chairs today, and I worked on a research project called Coinvite. The project aimed at exploring alternative spaces and methodologies to vindicate the debate around slum upgrading practices and policies, and to focus on the circulation of urban knowledge across different actors and cities. So the city we chose as a pilot was Medellin in Colombia, where we engaged with social and community leaders, local government representatives, academics, grassroots organizations, but also regional and global actors such as UN Habitat, the Platform for the Right to the City, the Habitat International Coalition, and many others. So one of the main outputs of the CoInvite project was the prototype of a transmedia storytelling platform where the voices and stories of the different actors engaged in urban transformation and specifically Islamic reading practices are showcased in a move to shift from the single actor narrative to a more multi-narrative environment. So you are seeing a bit of the navigation platform in there.
No, we are not seeing it.
You are not seeing it?
No, we are. You have only the first slide.
Really? Oh, sorry. It's showing it for me. But I'm gonna try to do it in that case. I'm going to start. Let me just see what is wrong.
Because we are very short on time.
Yes, I know. So this is, I'm going to take the timings and I'm going to put it again from here. And you tell me if you can see the, can you see it now?
No, you're not. We are not seeing any.
So
we are not seeing the presentation.
Okay, this is because I haven't. Okay.
I think you need to move on to wrap up because we just have 1 more minute.
I know. I'm really sorry about this inconvenience.
Just move on.
Yeah. Just tell me if you can see it now.
No, we don't.
Still no?
No, I would say to move on to the final slides and just to wrap up the idea.
But the problem is that can you see my screen?
Now, in this moment, no.
Okay, this is weird. Okay, if Anu can help me with the projection of the presentation, because I don't know what it's like. I am sharing it, but it seems like you are not seeing it.
Anut?
Yes, hold on.
Okay, let us be patient because, as you know, technology always fails.
Yes, and this is is actually sharing. If you can, Anut, if you can share from the slide number 4 or number three, yeah. So,
but we are very short on time, so I
no, just so you know that what is the platform. So yeah, so from number 4. Yes. So if you can, so you can put it in a slide, in presentation slide. Thank you. So the key drivers of the project were urban learning, and to go deeper into the question, like whose knowledges count, for instance, and storytelling as an act of solidarity and to foster empathy and new learning alliances. So the project ended last year, but given the synergy between actors and the themes, we decided to seek for more funding for a second phase that took the learnings from Medellin to the Latin American region, and why not globally. So next one, please. But as we all know, COVID arrived, and that changed a bit the plans we all had. And the grassroots collectives we engaged with in Medellin, all the organizations working at all scales and governments across continents, they started to respond to the pandemic in many different ways. Next. And one of those have been the development of digital platforms to make visible and available perspectives and initiatives emerging from different sectors. Dashboards fed with real-time data. However, data about informal settlements or community data about knowledges and learning networks existing before the pandemic are largely absent from those visualizations. So next, please.
That's the last one.
So building on the alliances the Convite fostered last year, we thought that a crucial aspect of yet another platform should be the visualization of linkages across sectors, the relational layer between actors, like how we are all connected and doing what, with which resources and where we were located. So next. So we began sketching the prototype of a mapped platform that focused just on that. That could be an excuse to budget on the knowledges communities have in informal settlements and to implement principles of open data across organizations working at different scales with different agendas, but with the Islamic braving as the common thread. So what you are seeing is a little bit of that visualization. And next one, please. So Synergies for Solidarity is in essence a learning alliance that intends to help all actors in the network to mobilize community knowledges on STEM upgrading, to promote the creation of new and alternative narratives through fostering emotional connections in what we believe is the time for a global solidarity. So thank you very much, and I'm really sorry about the technical issue.
Thanks a lot, Gina. Now we are going to move to our chair. Giovanna is going to share with us some of the comments and the kind of cross-cutting elements of the very different presentations, and we are going to open the floor for the questions that you've been receiving. So now we are, it's 3 p.m. We're conscious of the time, but just in order to have some time of interaction, I think we're going to extend 15 more minutes, if possible, to have a discussion. Giovanna?
Okay, I'll try to be as brief as possible. Thanks, Kata. Thanks all the speakers for their brilliant presentations. So what has emerged is a variety of ideas and approaches to think in the future. Definitely there is a sense that the pandemic should lead to a better world. And I'm quoting here, we cannot go back to the normal because the normal was the problem. Although there is also a very deep concern about the current increase of inequality and poverty. And again, I'm quoting, the pandemic is disproportionately affecting some people. Public health has all of a sudden become the most important subject. Many presentations did interrogate the not novel connection between design, urbanism, and health. However, discourses and measures around health bring the risk of normalizing and also depoliticizing the response. Physical distancing and stay at home do not operate in the same way everywhere, as we have seen, neither they are effective for everybody. In certain places, and I'm thinking Peru in the example that Belen did in her presentation, there are no refrigerators. People have to go out to buy food. It's a basic need. There is no stay-home option. As a result, public space is changing from below as well. People are redesigning it following new adaptation strategies and local mobilization. But there are also government-led responses in this sense. The stay-at-home measures have, to an extent, brought to the fore the issue of housing and transport justice. Now more than ever, we need to address the right to adequate housing and mobility. There is wide acknowledgement that health risk, whether it is a collective or individual risk, is always felt and perceived in different ways, whether because people do face many risks or because multiple crises do overlap. Responses in this case, rather than a normalizing effect, do increase the power and legitimacy of authoritarian and military states, as we have seen in the case of Libya and the presentation by Nada. Yet, people and groups do mobilize in multiple ways, and there have been a lot of emphasis in many presentations around community level type of response, rather than global response or even government-led type of initiatives. A final point, care beyond healthcare has also become so increasingly central, particularly in its collective dimension rather than the individual one. Collective self-care, this is a term that Shoko in her presentation used, care for the other, care about a community of care, even an infrastructure of care, or an ontology of care. We care because we are, because we live, because we dwell in the city. The idea of care, for instance, as holding together the pieces of a broken world might be able to open up to a new politics. These were just the few points that I managed to pick up from the different brilliant presentations. I would like to thank again all the speakers, and I would like to move on to the audience questions. We actually received a lot of questions, and I'm not entirely sure we will manage to read them all. I have over 10 questions in my list. I will go by order, so first on a first serve, first come base. I will ask the panelists to raise their hand, so there is an option in the Zoom. You raise your hand for replying. So the first question is coming from Sabine Leper. She's a member of ASF, Architects Without Borders, Sweden. She's asking to any panelist, how can we, from a distance, support our projects and partner organizations in low and middle income countries with dealing with the risks and consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and its related policies? This is a question for all panelists.
Perhaps shall we read 3 questions or so and see who wants to pick them up?
Yeah, sure. So the second one is from Luke Hilson, Design Director at Barton Wilmore. He's based in UK. He's saying, I would be interested to hear what each of the speakers think is the one biggest thing we can learn from the current situation. What is the one thing that we can change or implement moving forwards to improve our built environments and enhance health and well-being? So the first question was around the relationship with partners and projects when dealing with distant engagement. The second one is around one single thing that we can learn from the situation. The third question from Alexandra Katasonova. She's a guest researcher at TCPA Urban Planning Office in Berlin. She's asking specific questions to the second speaker. I assume she refers to Belen Desmason. From the presentation, we see that actions are still needed to be taken from the side of authorities to be tangible. What kind of shift is needed, in your opinion, for better cooperation between government and citizens?
Hi, I guess I'll try to respond because they're all interconnected for what my understanding is. I agree that what we're seeing is a huge involvement from the state, that for most of us living in neoliberal societies, it's a surprise. We are finding out that the state actually exists and it can be efficient and it has resources to mobilize at times. What we're not seeing is how the state, or how we're creating those connections between the state and small neighborhood units that are becoming spontaneously organized. So the thing that I think we need to learn, or we can really capitalize more, if that's a word to be used in this scenario, is how to create those linkages between the state in all its different levels, from the national to the metropolitan to the district, to encourage and sustain and have a better sense of controlling the situation with the help of people that are already doing it so from the ground. So I think it's also in the long term as well, like how is that going to happen? Because we're not going to be locked down in our houses for a while. So how slowly we're going to reopen our cities from very small neighborhood units, probably simultaneously. And for that, we will definitely need a better coordination between the citizens and the state in all those aspects.
Thank you, Belen. Any of the panelists would like to reply to the other questions?
Yeah, Giovanna.
Yep.
From an international scale, I think that we're learning how to cooperate. And actually, this meeting is one of those good examples. We're connected from Peru, from Myanmar, from Colombia, from England, trying to understand what's going on. I was hearing in yesterday's podcast from the New York Times, they were stating that the world record of having a vaccine for any given disease has been so far 4 years since the moment someone understood about that disease until the moment the vaccine was in the market. 4 years has been the world record. Right now, there are thousands of scientists all around the world speaking in Mandarin, in English, in Spanish, in Italian, in Serbian, in Arabic, trying to have this vaccine to the COVID-19. I think this is one of the biggest learning approaches we can have right now, and is that we can cooperate internationally without moving around, without taking an airplane, without going to London or New York or Sao Paulo or Bogota, just by using Zoom to share these ideas and these concepts. And then in a local scale, we're going to have to understand that, well, in some cases, there's no need for big meetings, just an email or even a WhatsApp message can do. places like Bogota that we don't have we don't have any metro line systems, or BRT is our main transport system, which is Transmilenio, which is completely packed and it's abusive for the users. We might understand that it's not necessary to go to a cafe, to a Starbucks or Juan Valdez Cafe, but with just any phone call, we can do a meeting that 2 months ago or 3 months ago we thought was completely necessary. But now with these tools and with this all the technology and social distancing, we have understood that we can have some shifts on our daily basis life that are useful for our own lives or and anyone's life anywhere in the world.
Thank you. Any other panelists that would like to share a takeaway, a single learning from this situation that they will bring forward?
Hi. I just want to make a small remarks about the first question. Is one of the things that maybe we could learn is, especially working with organizations across seas, is the right to the right information. Because this is also one of the biggest challenges in the Global South, is the ability to receive the right information and the right direction of things. So this is something that we are working on here. And another thing about what we are learning is how do we think space and behavior and connect our everyday living with the sets of rules that are managing our public life. This is also one of the things that we have noticed. Just a remark about maybe small enterprises are now gaining more than big enterprises in my context in Jordan, depending on the areas that you can move in. So small enterprises are getting more attention. So I think this is something that makes us think about the scale of our movements and the distribution of assets in our context. The last thing, maybe something just to take forward, I think one of the things that we could think about in the future is that we need to revisit the human rights at some point. What are our human rights in times of the pandemic? And this is the moment to institutionalize this and mainstream it. And yeah, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Amani. Any other panelists who want to add on this?
Can I give it a try at responding? I think one of the biggest takeaways for me and Hamido and our team is that we need to rethink the way we address emergencies in general, because we keep giving temporary solutions for permanent issues that keep coming on. So I think we have to be more committed to giving permanent solutions to these permanent issues. So maybe we can use the lockdown period, for example, now to test some interim interventions, but we need to be committed to permanent solutions.
Thank you.
Sorry, John, just to add, because I think you have raised very interesting points, Amani and Gabriela. Something that I think we can do from home using the digital platforms we have available, and it's a very small thing, but it's so meaningful for organizations who are who are running on volunteers. They need so much help putting data, organizing databases, so that data can be available for mapping platforms like the one we are promoting. So I'm going to leave a link to the form that we are promoting, or we are helping or collecting all the data that is moving the mapping platform. So you can help us gathering initiatives that are happening in your area, or you can spread it across your own networks, so we can start building a very collective and a global database where all these initiatives are taking place. So that would be super useful.
Thanks a lot. I would like to read another comment. It's actually question. It's actually two questions, but they go in a similar direction. There is the first one is from Cécile Boucher. She's asking, despite the global reach of COVID-19, presenters today have focused on local community and local government-led initiatives to overcome situation. Which form of global response would the speakers picture happening in the future, if any? So that's the first. The second, which is also related, is from Haim Yacobi, also a colleague at TPU. He's saying, thanks for the excellent presentations, very inspiring. What I'm missing from most presentation is a call or an acknowledgement of the role of the state. As an urbanist, I do appreciate the role of cities. However, what we learn from the current crisis is that the withdrawal of state is the real problem. How can we bring back the state into cities, their planning and management? How can we overcome Saskia Sassen's celebration of cities as isolated political entities with the sufficient power to manage their population? Over to you, to whomever would like to address these two questions.
I'd just like to say that I don't think that cities are isolated islands like that. That's the whole point, that cities cannot survive without their hinterlands. And that seems a really important understanding when we're redeveloping the relationships of the state at the local, regional, national, and indeed wider than that. I'll leave it there.
Quickly, as from the nonprofit side, we don't want to do something that the governments do. We want to do something or lead the way or show that it's possible, so they can work together with us and maybe take it from there. But we don't presume that our role is in between this, is making these bridges, is not actually doing permanent solutions alone, but actually showing it's possible so they can actually take it, and the communities can actually put pressure, if you say, to things be delivered as a state, as a government policy action. But sometimes governments are too slow to do it by many reasons, and as a nonprofit, we have some agility to fast track some things and maybe deliver and show it's possible. But yeah, I think the state has to do it at the end, but in the meantime, we push it.
I just add to that really quickly. In places where the state is fragile, I think we're going to continue seeing more efforts being done on the city level, on the urban level, particularly from local communities and from non-state actors. And I think what we need to see is the state trying to first gain legitimacy back from the people. So there needs to be some level of accountability there in order for them to feel like they need to provide services for the people as a first step. Otherwise, I think we're going to continue seeing more of these localized initiatives.
Thanks, Nada. Thanks a lot. Catalina, can I continue, or should we wrap it up?
We need to wrap up because we are way long time.
Apologies about that.
Thanks a lot. We are all learning, and it's it's very fascinating, all the issues that you have raised. We have been opening the manifesto, and some of you have been sharing your thoughts on that. So I would like to thank you all, and we are going to keep your questions and hopefully share them with our panelists so they can be seen and maybe answered later. But I think I would like just to read a couple of things that came up on the manifesto to wrap up. And is this idea that urban design must be healthy, integrated, and promote well-being, including all the current and future generations. And one point that is interesting is we believe in ethics of radical care, in which the paradigms such as livability can be expanded towards urban livability. So livability as a new emerging issue, celebrating everyday life and compassionate deeds as part of our human condition. And the list goes on. So I think it could be very nice to keep hearing from you. We are going to have another series of webinars in the near future, so stay tuned and see our social media. Thanks a lot for joining us, and big hug from the lockdown in London. Take care. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot. Bye.